Emily Damari, Romi Gonen and Doron Steinbrecher, the first Israeli hostages freed under the ceasefire-hostage release deal, were reunited with their families on Sunday night Israel time. And while the Jewish world grapples with the joy of their return after 471 days of captivity and uneasiness over the fate of the 94 other captives still in Gaza, the exchange has once again highlighted Hamas's duplicity and propaganda, framing itself as both the victim and victor. Hamas's exploitation of human suffering, Israeli and Palestinian, fuels its narrative. In June last year, the Wall Street Journal reported that Yahya Sinwar, Hamas's then leader and mastermind of the October 7 massacre, rejected a deal, calculating that continued fighting and civilian deaths would serve his agenda by provoking international condemnation of Israel. Sinwar's chilling 2018 statement to an Italian journalist, "We make the headlines only with blood, no news," exposed the cynical nature behind Hamas's strategy, eagerly amplified by many players in the global media. Here are 3 examples of how Hamas distorted the narrative during the ceasefire hostage exchange alone. Number 1, Hamas was required to provide the names of the first 3 hostages by 8:30 a.m. Sunday, Israel time, but failed to do so. Citing this breach of the ceasefire hostage deal, Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu delayed the ceasefire until Hamas complied. Yet, instead of highlighting Hamas's blatant and cruel stalling tactic that broke the terms of the agreement, many media outlets framed Israel as reneging on the deal, reinforcing the false narrative of Israel as the warmongering aggressor. 3 hours late, Hamas finally provided the names. Israel implemented the ceasefire and began organising the agreed-upon release of 90 Palestinian prisoners almost immediately. Number 2. Moments after the ceasefire began, Al Jazeera showed Hamas fighters pouring out of Nasser Hospital in Gaza's Khan Yunis. According to international human rights law, unless they are exploited for military purposes, hospitals are off limits for fighting. And yet, despite the plethora of evidence that proved Hamas was guilty of doing just that throughout the war, Israel was repeatedly accused of attacking hospitals without justification. Number 3. Let's talk about the moment that Romi, Emily and Doron were transferred from Hamas to the Red Cross. What appeared to be thousands of Hamas supporters began to flood the meeting point at Saraya Square in Gaza City. No one in the crowd remotely resembled the image of a starving victim of famine, the absurd charge often levelled at Israel. These people looked energetic, well-dressed, and were holding mobile phones. Then, masked Hamas terrorists rolled in, each in military green uniform brandishing Kalashnikov rifles. When the Hamas vehicle holding the hostages arrived, people in the crowd surged forward, surrounding the side of the van and scaling its roof. As gun barrels swung through the air, the cheering mob chanted Allahu Akbar, God is great in Arabic. The tiny figures of the hostages winced and cowered as they were pulled from the Hamas van, pushed a few metres through the sea of masked terrorists into the adjacent Red Cross vehicle. Doron Steinbrecher, wearing a pink pattern jumper, wore a collar with the pattern of a Palestinian flag around her neck. Hamas fighters hung off and on every surface the Red Cross vehicle too. One terrorist, standing on its roof, gave the victory sign as the car began to move off. The jubilant scenes were reminiscent of October 7, when dead Israelis were paraded through Gaza's streets. So what does all this communicate? As Ohad Chemo, long-standing Palestinian affairs correspondent at Israel's Channel 12 put it, even if there is one Hamas man left in the world and he has one hand and 2 or 3 fingers cut off, he will still do this and say, I won. And that is what Hamas is trying to convey now. Victory, steadfastness, and standing strong. We defeated one of the strongest armies in the world, and that's our victory. Meanwhile, Hamas's military spokesperson Abu Ubaidah has said that the October 7 war is the start of what Hamas considers the beginning of Palestinian liberation. In other words, Hamas is desperately trying to put a positive spin on the catastrophe that fell upon the Palestinians because of the failed strategy of terror and armed struggle. Hamas's attempt to project strength was further emphasised by its fighters' unsoiled military uniforms, which belied the reality that they wore civilian clothing when they fought, hid in tunnels and used war-weary Gazans as their human shields. But in reality, photos taken from a slightly different angle told a different story. a relatively small gathering of Gazans in an area largely destroyed by the IDF. Despite the limited size of the crowd, Hamas members still struggled to maintain control, resorting to beating those who approached and even firing warning shots into the air shortly before the hostages were transferred. Do most people in the Gaza Strip believe in the perception of strength Hamas is trying to push? No, says Chemo, a view concurred by analysts here at AIJAC and in Israel. Many in Gaza and beyond are understandably angry with Hamas, unimpressed by its empty gestures and symbols, though they may be afraid to admit it openly. Unlike the Hamas faithful at the staged hostage release rally, ordinary Gazans returning to their cities and villages that now lie in ruins recognise this show of strength as farcical political theatre. The spectacle surrounding the hostage release was not a show of strength, but a glaring testament to Hamas's weakness. Resorting to chest-beating theatrics by exploiting traumatised, vulnerable female hostages only emphasises its desperation. Later, Hamas tried again to control the narrative by putting out a propaganda video showing the release of the 3 hostages. The footage showed the hostages smiling nervously as Hamas operatives gave them gift bags, which reportedly included photos of their time in captivity and a release certificate, obscenely implying they'd served their prison time. The superficial and uncritical treatment that most foreign media have given to the complex reality in this war, started by Hamas, plays into the hands of Hamas and achieves little but further undermining efforts to bring peace to the region. The question is, will the world's media challenge this latest chapter or continue to amplify it uncritically?